Welcome to NiceneCouncil.com's Internet radio broadcast. For more information, visit us on the web at www.NiceneCouncil.com. Now here is your host, Jerry Johnson.
Welcome to another edition of NiceneCouncil.com's Internet radio broadcast. I'm Jerry Johnson. I've entitled this segment, Davy Crockett is Dead. The Christian's duty to help the widow and orphan is clearly stated in the Bible in James chapter 1, verses 26 through 27. If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Besides the clear command to help the helpless, God's word equally and emphatically forbids stealing, even if it is to help the poor. Yet there are some professed Christians who believe that stealing is a virtue so long as it is done in the name of social justice. They advocate political programs to feed the hungry, house the homeless, and clothe the naked. But governments, like all human beings and institutions, are subject to God's law and are specifically commanded not to steal. In a recent segment on the O'Reilly Factor, the host, Bill O'Reilly, asked his guest, Mr. Bernie Goldberg, to comment on a statement made by the Lord Jesus. Mr. Goldberg interrupted O'Reilly by saying he didn't care what Jesus said. He went on to explain that if Jesus was here in the flesh today, he would be a liberal Democrat. His basis for this comment was the liberal and progressive belief of spreading the wealth, which he maintains would have appealed to and was the same as Jesus' conviction of helping the poor. This idea appears to prevail in the minds of millions of Americans today who call themselves Christians. They reason, Jesus said to help the poor, and the new health care law does just that. Therefore, Jesus would approve of Obamacare and countless other social programs. Let me say here and now that I could not disagree more, and here is why. Taxing one group of people and giving that money to another is stealing. In the name of compassion, Congress forces others to give to their favorite charities. And this not only creates an atmosphere of vote buying, but it is a clear violation of the Eighth Commandment, and get this, the Constitution of the United States. That this is wrong on numerous levels, I want to share with you an event that took place in Congress in 1828 and an appeal on the House floor by then Congressman Colonel Davy Crockett. In the House of Representatives, a bill was taken up appropriating money for the benefit of a widow who was living in poverty. Her late husband had been a distinguished naval officer. Several beautiful speeches flowing with compassion had been made on the House floor in support of the $10,000 appropriation. The Speaker was just about to put the question to a vote when Congressman Crockett arose. Mr. Speaker, he said, I have as much respect for the memory of the deceased and as much sympathy for the sufferings of the living, if suffering there be, as any man in this House. But we must not permit our respect for the dead or our sympathy for the part of the living to lead us into an act of injustice to the balance of the living. I will not go into an argument to prove that Congress has no power to appropriate this money as an act of charity. Every member upon this floor knows it. We have the right as individuals to give away as much of our own money as we please in charity. But as members of Congress, we have no right to appropriate a single dollar of the public money. Some eloquent appeals have been made to us upon the ground that it is a debt due the deceased. But, Mr. Speaker, the deceased lived long after the close of the war. He was in office to the day of his death, and I have never heard from anyone that the government was in debt to him. Every man in this House knows it is not a debt. We cannot, without the grossest corruption, appropriate this money as the payment of a debt. We have not the semblance of authority to appropriate it as charity. Mr. Speaker, I have said we have the right to give as much money of our own as we please. I am the poorest man on this floor. I cannot vote for this bill, but I will give 1 week's pay to the object, and if every member of Congress will do the same, it will amount to more than the bill asks." At this point, Colonel Crockett took his seat. Nobody replied. The bill was put upon its passage, and instead of passing unanimously as was generally supposed, and as, no doubt, it would but for that speech by Colonel Crockett, it received but few votes, and of course was defeated. Later, when asked by a friend why he had opposed the appropriation, Colonel Crockett gave this explanation. "My friends, several years ago, I was one evening standing on the steps of the Capitol with some other members of Congress when our attention was attracted by a great light over in Georgetown. It was evidently a large fire. We jumped into a hack and drove over as fast as we could. In spite of all that could be done, many houses were burned and many families made homeless, and besides, some of them had lost all but the clothes they had on. The weather was very cold, and when I saw so many women and children suffering, I felt that something ought to be done for them. The next morning a bill was introduced appropriating $20,000 for their relief. We put aside all other business and rushed it through as soon as it could be done. The next summer, when it began to be time to think about the re-election campaign, I concluded that I would take a trip around my district and speak to some of the boys. I had no opposition there, but as the election was some time off, I did not know what might turn up. When riding one day in a part of my district in which I was more of a stranger than any other, I saw a man in a field plowing and coming toward the road. I gauged my gait so that we should meet as he came to the fence. As he came up, I spoke to the man. He replied politely, but, as I thought, rather coldly. I began, "Well, my friend, I'm one of those unfortunate beings called candidates." At this point, the man interrupted me, but before I could get another word out of my mouth, he said, "Yes, I know you. You are Colonel Crockett. I have seen you once before, and I voted for you the last time you were elected. I suppose you are out electioneering now, but you had better not waste your time or mine, for I shall not vote for you again." Now, Colonel Crockett was shocked and dismayed at this proclamation, to say the least. He had noted the rather cool reception, but now to have this said by this man whom he did not know was devastating, and he begged the man to tell him why. What had he done to deserve such a treatment? "Well, Colonel Crockett," the man responded, "it is hardly worthwhile to waste time or words upon it. I do not see how it can be mended. But you gave a vote last winter which shows that either you have not the capacity to understand the Constitution, or that you are wanting in the honesty and firmness to be guided by it. In either case, you are not the man to represent me. But I beg your pardon for expressing it that way. I did not intend to avail myself of the privilege of the constituent to speak plainly to a candidate for the purpose of insulting or wounding him. I intended by it only to say that your understanding of the Constitution is very different from mine. I believe, Colonel, you to be an honest man, but your understanding of the Constitution is so different from mine, I cannot overlook it, because the Constitution, to be worth anything, must be held sacred and rigidly observed in all its provisions. The man who wields power and misrepresents it is more dangerous the more honest of a man he is." Colonel Crockett answered this and said, "I admit the truth of all you say, but there must be some mistake, for I do not remember that I gave any vote last winter upon any constitutional question." The man explained, "No, Colonel, there's no mistake. Though I live here in the backwoods and seldom go from home, I take the papers from Washington and read very carefully all the proceedings of Congress. My paper says that last winter you voted for a bill to appropriate $20,000 to some sufferers by a fire in Georgetown. Now, sir, is that true?" Somewhat startled that this man perceived that this event was important enough to call it a constitutional question, and was sure that the man misunderstood the issue upon which the vote was taken, confident that if he could explain himself, the man would see it his way, Colonel Crockett answered, "Well, my friend, I may as well own up. You have got me there. But certainly nobody will complain that a great and rich country like ours should give the insignificant sum of $20,000 to relieve its suffering women and children, particularly with a full and overflowing treasury. And I am sure if you had been there, you would have done just as I did." The man's response to what Colonel Crockett had just said put him on his heels. "It's not the amount, Colonel, that I complain of. It is the principle. In the first place, the government ought to have in the treasury no more than enough for its legitimate purpose. But that has nothing to do with the question. The power of collecting and dispersing money at pleasure is the most dangerous power that can be trusted to man, particularly under our system of collecting revenue by a tariff, which reaches every man in the country, no matter how poor he may be. And the poorer he is, the more he pays in proportion to his means. What is worse, it presses upon him without his knowledge where the weight centers, for there is not a man in the United States who can ever guess how much he pays to the government. So you see, Colonel, that while you are contributing to the relief of one, the 20,000 in D.C. who had their houses burnt, you are drawing it from thousands who are even worse off than he is." That thought hit Colonel Crockett upside the head like a tomahawk. In all honesty, he had never considered it. And here was this man, this poor farmer, who understood that the civil magistrate must be careful and diligent in examining all sides of an issue. But the man was not finished. He continued, "Colonel, if you had the right to give anything, the amount was simply a matter of discretion with you. You had as much right to give 20 million as 20,000. If you have the right to give to one, you have the right to give to all. And as the Constitution neither defines charity nor stipulates the amount, you are at liberty to give to any and everything which you may believe or profess to believe is a charity, and to any amount you may think proper. You will very easily perceive what a wide door this would open for fraud and corruption and favoritism on the one hand, and for robbing the people on the other. No, Colonel, Congress has no right to give charity." I'm going to say that again. No, Colonel, Congress has no right to give charity. Individual members may give as much of their own money as they please, but they have no right to touch a dollar of the public money for that purpose. The man then said this to Colonel Crockett: "If twice as many houses had been burned in this county," meaning the county the man lived in, "neither you nor any other member of Congress would have thought of appropriating a dollar for our relief. There are about 240 members of Congress. If they had shown their sympathy for the sufferers by each contributing 1 week's pay, it would have made over $13,000. And there are plenty of wealthy men in and around Washington who could have given the full 20,000 without depriving themselves of even a single luxury of life. But our congressmen, you included, Colonel, chose to keep their own money, which, if reports be true, some of them spend not very creditably. And no doubt the people about Washington applauded you for relieving them from the necessity of giving by giving what was not yours to give. The people have delegated to Congress by the Constitution the power to do certain things. To do these, it is authorized to collect and pay monies, and for nothing else. Everything beyond this is usurpation and a violation of the Constitution." By his own account, Crockett was somewhat embarrassed. He stood there in a daze while being scolded by this most unlikely critic. He continued to listen as this man explained why he would never vote for him again. "You see, Colonel, you have violated the Constitution in what I consider a vital point. It is a precedent fraught with danger to the country, for when Congress once began to stretch its powers beyond the limits of the Constitution, there is no limit to it